Welcome back to GPU Benchmarks. I'm here today with something that's not a GPU. It's an SSD. Phison today launched, or at least released to reviewers, its new E28 controller. This is an engineering sample, a preview of what's to come, and it's a big upgrade from their previous generation E26. The E26 was the first consumer PCIe 5.0 drive available. It powered all of the fastest SSDs for the last 2 years, basically, until Silicon Motion released its SM2508 controller. And that's only kind of accurate, because the SM2508 looks good, but there must be some underlying issues. It's just not rolling out in the quantities that I would normally expect to see. Like, we've got preview drives from the Micron 4600 and the Acer GM9000. Those are supposed to be available, but you can't buy them anywhere, even though it's been months since they were first sent out for review. So I don't know what's going on there. Phison's E28 kind of is in the same situation. It's not ready for purchase yet. This engineering sample, Phison even says it's not fully tuned. It's not ready for retail sales just yet. They're finalizing firmware, maybe fixing some final bugs. But let's just get right into the benchmarks because it's fast. Is it faster than the competition? Well, right now, no, it's not. It's close. And that's good, but there's still some room to make up. So let's talk about the overall quick view of performance. We have a bunch of PCIe 5.0 drives plus the Samsung 990 Pro on the bottom of the charts just to show you what one of the best Gen 4 PCI Express drives could do. And it's funny because you've got things like the ADATA Legend 970 Pro that uses the competing InnoGrit PCIe 5.0 controller. Crucial's P510 that uses Phison's E31T. MP700, that was the original E26 drive, but that had the slower NAND, the 1600 megatransfer per second NAND. Up at the fourth position, we've got the Sabrent Rocket 5, which is the same controller, the E26 controller, but that's with the 2400 megatransfers per second. And then Samsung's 9100 Pro, that's brand new. It's their first PCIe 5.0 drive, their first true one, because I don't count the 990 Evo or whatever, the X2, the two-lane PCIe 5.0. And then Micron's 4600 2TB and Acer's GM9000 2TB. Both of those use the Silicon Motion controller, but one of them has Micron NAND flash. That's the Micron drive, not surprisingly. And then the other has Kyocera NAND. And then finally, we have the WD Black SN8100. Now that, as I understand it, is actually using the same Silicon Motion controller, just customized by Western Digital a little bit. And then there's the blue one, the Phison E28 ES. So across all of the benchmarks, it's right in line with the Micron 4600, faster than the Acer Predator, which has the same SM2508 but uses Kyocera NAND, and the Phison drive is using Kyocera NAND. And then there's the WD Black, which I think that might have Kyocera NAND as well, or SanDisk NAND. It's kind of confusing. Let's go through the individual benchmarks. 3DMark storage test. This has three parts. There's a bandwidth test, and in this one, it's the Phison drives a little bit slower than the top drives. WD's SN8100 comes out in first place. Bandwidth and latency translate into the score, UL score, which pretty much echoes what we saw on the bandwidth. And then here's the latency results. So that WD Black really has some good latency results in the 3DMark test. Now, the interesting thing here is that you get the same types of scores, but with different results when we look at PCMark. So PCMark, in the bandwidth test, the E28 pops to the top, just outpacing the WD Black. 1,200 megabytes per second, over 1,200 megabytes a second. That's a new record. If we look at the score, we also see that slight advantage, 7777 compared to 7666. And in latency, they're both scoring 21 microseconds. And so that, to me, suggests that maybe there's some firmware tuning that's been done that helps PCMark 10, but it hasn't been fully directed at improving the 3DMark results. Next up, I want to do, this is kind of the worst case scenario. direct to flash write performance. So you just pepper the drive with constant sequential writes, and modern SSDs, they have a pseudo SLC cache, which with a TLC drive can be up to 1/3 of the total capacity. That's like 660 gigabytes. And then after that, they drop into kind of a lower performance mode. So they'll write at like almost 14 gigabytes per second, depending on the controller and the system. And then they'll drop down to maybe direct to NAND, which will vary in speed. And then after a while, you'll get like a flushing of the cache where it has to get rid of all the extra stuff, because you've written to the SLC cache, so you have to read that into memory, convert those SLC blocks into TLC, and then write to TLC. So we call that folding, and folding is complex. It takes a while. And then once all the folding is done, then we do a direct to TLC writes. And so when that happens, that's the worst case. And the reason that's important, in my opinion, is because you're not usually going to run a drive in a pristine state where, hey, there's nothing on here, so you're just writing to the PSLC cache. Often you'll end up writing to the TLC cache because your drive's 60%, 80% full, whatever. That's why QLC NAND is so bad, in my opinion, because the worst case performance, I don't have any QLC drives shown here, but I've seen QLC drives that only write at 100, 200, 300 megabytes per second when their cache is totally depleted. And that is super slow. Like, that's hard drive speeds. And that's where people are like, yeah, QLC is bad. It's not the worst thing ever, but you can encounter things where the difference is super, super noticeable. That takes care of a lot of the, what do you want to call them, the more in-depth benchmarks. One last test we have before we get to the synthetics, the pure synthetics, is DiskBench. This is a 75 gigabyte copy test. We're reading data from the drive and copying it to itself in a new folder. And so this is a pretty intensive test, and it's actually a really good proxy for like real world performance. And again, Phison's E28 ES does exceptionally well here, breaking 3 gigabytes per second for average performance. So overall, it looks really good in all of the real world testing. Let's also quickly talk about some non-real world, some synthetic tests. I'm using Crystal Disk Mark 8. Probably the most important test, I think, is the random read IOPS for 4K QD1. So QDepth 1, only one read operation at a time, and then when that's finished, another one is sent. A lot of times you'll get QD256, QD32, whatever, really high QDepths, and those are, for a consumer drive, they just don't matter. In a server environment, that matters, but for a consumer drive, those are fantasy land QDepths. Most QDepths are at 1, maybe up to 4. Beyond 4, almost nothing ever hits that. So super high performance with QD32 just doesn't matter. I will show those results, but here, again, this is early firmware, so tuning could very well improve performance 10% or more, which would put the Phison's E28 drive right up with the WD Black, and right now it's about 10% behind. We also have the write IOPS for QD1, and this is kind of interesting because Phison does really well here. Takes top marks. In fact, the Western Digital falls off the pace by 5%. In between those two is the Crucial P510, which is another Phison-based drive. It's just using the E31T controller. ADATA's Legend 970 Pro actually has the highest QD1 write IOPS. Otherwise, that drive is pretty lackluster. It uses more power than the E26 and often delivers less performance. I said I would show the QD256. Here you go. There's new firmware out for the Phison drive. I haven't tested it yet. I'll update this with additional testing in the future. But right now, it's super, super high QDepth IOPS result. It fell to the bottom of the charts. This isn't like critical. Early firmware could totally cause this. And I think that's probably what the firmware update is supposed to address. I just haven't had time to install and retest. We can do the same thing for write IOPS, QD256. We're getting almost 2 million IOPS, which is screaming. That's like 500 megabytes per second for fully random. That's pretty crazy. We also have the latency results for read and write IOPS at QD1. This often correlates to the actual throughput, and that's what we see here. WD Black's is the fastest with 30 microseconds. Phison comes in second at 33.7. Same thing with the write latency. Phison's in second place. The ADATA Legend is in first place. Then let's go on to the sequential workloads. So these, again, are important, but I don't know that they're the end-all be-all. QD1, we're getting 11 gigabytes per second on the Phison versus 10 on the Samsung. Micron's 4600 is at 9.7. WD Black is also at 9.6. So a little bit faster there from Phison for QD1. If we go to higher queue depths, so lots more requests for data so that you're saturating the drive. And on the Z790 platform that I used for testing, everything sort of bottlenecks at around 14.3 gigabytes per second. There are other platforms that might hit 14.9, 15 gigabytes per second, like a Xeon platform, Threadripper platform, or even AMD's X670E or what's the new one, 870E. But those platforms also tend to show worse performance in other areas, like QD1 performance in random might be worse. So not the most critical thing here, but it is useful to see, you're pulling 14 gigabytes per second. And Phison has said they're going to use a tweaked version of this controller in some data center drives as well as caching drives. Let's go on to sequential write speed. 10.5, 10.6 gigabytes per second compared to 10.8, 10.9 on the two faster drives, which are, again, despite it saying WD Black, it is using the same SMI controller, the SM2508. Go to higher queue depths, QD8, and you get about the same delta between them, 13.3 on the Phison, 13.7, almost 13.8 for the Micron 4600. And that basically does it. So let's go back to the overall view of performance. Again, this is the geometric mean of all the bandwidth tests, not including latency. And we can see the Phison E28 engineering sample is performing just a little bit below the Micron 4600. That's like a full retail OEM drive. It's ahead by a little bit of the Sabrent Rocket 5, which was arguably the fastest variant of the E26 controller. And at the top, we have WD Black's SN8100. That's using different NAND than the Micron 4600. The WD Black is the same controller as the 4600, as well as the Acer Predator, but it's using the same NAND as the Predator, except it's clocked faster. And that's where the remaining firmware tweaks could come into play from Phison and their partners. It won't be Phison necessarily directly, but they'll enable support for faster NAND. So right now, as I understand it, the Phison E28 is using the Kyosha 2400 megatransfer per second BiCS8 NAND. The WD Black SN8100 is using SanDisk BiCS8 NAND. I don't know what the difference is between the SanDisk and Kyosha BiCS8, if they're actually made on different lines. But the key is, I believe SanDisk has enabled up to 3600 megatransfers per second on its variant of BiCS8. And I think the SN8100 might be using that. I'm not totally sure. So in the future, when these drives using Phison E28 hit retail, we will almost certainly see a variation that uses the faster 3600 megatransfer per second NAND. And that could easily close the gap with any performance deltas where the WD Black came out ahead. Will it make a huge difference? Probably not. I think they'll end up pretty dang close to tied, and outside of running in-depth benchmarks, you wouldn't really notice the difference. However, pricing is going to be a big factor. WD Black, SanDisk knows that the WD Black name is a premium brand, and they have priced it as such, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we see competing Phison E28 drives using the same NAND as the WD Black that cost less and offer equal or better performance. And it also uses less power, according to Phison, like 1.3 watt idle versus 1.5 watt idle on the WD Black. Part of that power discrepancy is probably because the WD Black uses DDR4 for its DRAM caching, whereas the Phison E28 is using LPDDR4, so a little bit lower power. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and let me know if you like this type of content, and I'll see if I can do more of it. Take care. Until next time.